certainly encourage all of you to, as much as possible, to be involved with those lessons and this work. Also, on behalf of the elderships, we want to express our support and commendation of Bruce's lesson this morning on modesty. It's such an important topic and something that the world would just cringe to hear. And it's not a topic that is taught in pulpits in many places. But we want you to hear those truths, and it is something we need to apply to our lives. We're very pleased to have Dan Peters and his wife Tammy with us this morning. Dan is one of the men that we help support in proclaiming the gospel. And we try as frequently as possible to have men that we help support from this congregation, financially supporting them in their work. We try to bring them and have them speak to you about their work and teach the gospel here as well. Dan is in Severin, Romania. That's where his work takes place, and as I said, we help him in that work. We also helped support Dan when he was in Bradley, Arkansas, prior to going to Romania for that work. So we're very happy to have you with us, Dan. It's been a great pleasure being with you the last day and a half. Dan and I were in school together back in the early 80s, and we haven't seen each other since then. We've communicated several times via email and telephone, but it's been such a great pleasure to be with you, and we look forward to hearing your message.
I've been looking forward to being here with you, to thank you personally for supporting me and helping me as I preached in Bradley, Arkansas, went to Romania, got a detour to Ireland for 3 months, and back to Romania. And I'm so thankful for the help you have helped me, and Lord willing, I've also been able to help others in preaching the Word. I have 3 objectives this afternoon. Basically, first thing is to say thank you. Second thing I want to do is to give you a little report of work that we've done in a little bit of Arkansas, in Bradley, and also in Romania, and what we want to do in Romania. And the last thing, I want to give a little lessons along the way. I want to start off with a little story that I try to share sometimes when I meet atheist friends and to change their perspective about God generally. When I was in Barberton, Ohio, which my youngest son today is in Barberton, Ohio preaching. When I was in Barberton, Ohio, when I was in the couple of years out of FC and in the middle of FC, one of the elders wanted to study with me in the morning, and the preacher as well, George and Bill. So we began to study about 6 o'clock in the morning, and George would bring his coffee, and one day I decided I stopped by a 7-Eleven of some kind and bring a little sweet roll. And this went on for about a week, maybe week and a half. And when I came in, perhaps a little late, I can't remember back that far, I didn't bring the sweet roll. And George and Bill looked up at me like I harmed them, like I hurt them, not bringing something to the Bible study. And I remember thinking about that. They got used to the idea of me bringing something, and I got used to George's coffee. But did I actually harm them by not bringing something that day? No, I didn't harm them. Take your Bible for a moment and go to Isaiah chapter 50, which I sure has all the earmarks of prophecy of Christ in Isaiah 50. In Isaiah 50 in verse 4, it says, "The Lord has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I may know how to sustain with a word him who is weary. Morning by morning he awakens. I want you to realize something. And hopefully you're a believer in the Lord. But I want you to know every morning God has wakened you up. You've awoke. God has given you the gift of life. And our problem sometimes, we've gotten used to it. Every single day, God has offered you life. I had a great conversation with a lawnmower fella in Bradley, old James. And James, he cracked me up one time when he said, I don't even know how to wake up, Dan. And that kind of caught me off guard. And I said, what do you mean? You can set the alarm. He goes, no. Some people never hear the alarm. They pass away in sleep. I appreciate his comment about that. We must realize that God has given us life every morning because He chose to. And the first time God doesn't give you a sweet roll, life. God has not harmed you. We really haven't been thankful for all the things that God has done to us up to this point. That hasn't come into our heart and mind and concept. God has given us life. And in this passage, which I think talks about Jesus, what does Jesus do when God gives Him life on the earth? Morning by morning He awakens my ear to hear as those who are taught. So, morning by morning, Jesus wakes up to listen to His Father and to hear His voice and to obey. Verse 5, the Lord has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I turned not backward. I gave my back to those who strike me, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. When they spit upon Jesus, He knew it was coming. He knew what they would do to Him. And He didn't turn from it. He accepted what they gave Him. When I look at Jesus, I look at somebody who wakes up every morning. It's a gift from God. And what does Jesus do? He gives it back to God. If you know anything about the character and the person of Christ, He is the kind that He would not do it for Himself, but He'll do it for others. And when He wakes up in the morning, how does He give that day back to God? I'm going to do what God says. That's what Jesus does. Whatever the Father wants, this is the day He gave me, I'm giving it back to God. And even when all authority in heaven and earth is given to Him, what's He going to do at the end? He doesn't need it or want it. What's He going to do at the end? He's going to give it all back to the Father. The love between Jesus and the Father is so rich, so selfless. We just stand back sometimes in awe. And we as Christians, we want in on that. I want to love like Jesus loved. But we have to receive it first as a deposit. That this today is given to me as a gift. And it's a deposit and it's in my heart, and I want to give it back to God. And it's not because God has to, but God's chosen to give you life. And He's chosen to give me life too. And I want to thank you as a congregation that you make deposits to me every month, that I might help some of those who've never heard the gospel. In all of Romania, we could put all the Christians in Romania, and they would be about a fourth of this building. It's very sparse. It's, I would say, up like north, but I've been up north most of my life. It's Christianity is Christians are very scarce there, but I want to try to reach them as I can. I'll bring that illustration hopefully back up before I'm done with the lesson. I thank you for helping me when I was working in Bradley. When I was working in Bradley, I was living in Texarkana, going back and forth. My mom was in Texarkana trying to help out. And so we drove over about an hour every time. And much of Bradley has come up here to be with me today. And let me just say, I remember how many months it was. Right now I'm thinking it's about 6 months I went from Texarkana to Bradley, and every Sunday they had me in their home for 6 months. Because they had to? No. Just like that sweet roll. They just volunteered. And I will never forget what they've done in that regard. To me it is remarkable. It stands out. The hospitality of a small congregation of 10 or 12 people, to do that consistently. And they showed great love. And I wish I could just put them in my pocket and take it back to Romania. But I don't think that's going to happen. But they worked. We worked together. We had a Bible study in Shane and Megan's home in Revelation. We had non-Christians coming to that study. We had made extra flyers for the bulletins, and some would take up 50 bulletins on Sunday and pass them out. And one of the things I was very thankful for at the end, I held a meeting there. They worked, I worked, we passed out, talked to people. In the last gospel meeting, we had a visitor from the community every night of the gospel meeting except one night. I think it was Thursday night. For a small little town of 563, to me that was saying something. I felt tremendous for their effort and what we did together. And you were part of that because you're willing to help me teaching Bradley. I found it very difficult leaving Bradley. I now don't even want to face them as I talk here. But the population of 563, I had a difficult time to think about I would stay there very long to grow the church. Maybe that's wrong in my thinking, but that's how I think about it. Now, what you're looking on a map up here is a picture of Romania, and you see Severin up there. That's where I live. And in Craiova is a congregation, no congregation. In Craiova, there's a Bible study that takes place every 2 weeks, because we go there and pass out flyers, and we do a study in Luke. We've had some visitors show up, and we're trying to grow a church. It's over 200,000 people. It's a big city. Craiova is 73 or so thousand. And then there's a small church over in Constanza, also that has called me over several times to go over there and work with them. I call it kind of like a gospel meeting, but it's not really like a gospel meeting, but I studied with all the members during that week. And so that's where I've been working in the southern part of Romania. This family here, you see my wife there in the blue, they're the ones who've been asking Carrie Keenan, send us somebody to come over and help. Many people have left Romania, period. When they joined the EU, they could freely now travel the borders, and they make better money crossing the country. So many have left the village and the bigger cities, and the church has shrunk quite a bit, and they keep asking Carrie for help. Well, we heard that call, went over and talked with them, and they invited us to come and work with them. There's a small church over here in Constanza, and we've worked with them. We may be working with them in this next coming year. And my son, who just got married, after getting a few months under his belt in Severin by himself. You know, I keep saying that and talking about that, but let me just say, sometimes he fascinates me. He's so far above me in so many ways, I can't hardly put my mind around it. As far as getting on Meetup, doing the internet, as far as a website for the church, he's very intuitive. And sometimes I want to stand off out of the way and let him go, because he really is very zealous for the Lord. But we've worked well together. So those are two places that I've been going back and forth, mainly in Severin, but we've had 4 or 5 trips to Constanza by train. It's about an 8-hour drive, not 8-hour trip to Constanza by train, and we switch in Bucharest. This is the church building that's there. I don't know why it's so drab looking, but it's actually very nice. They have a baptistry outside and a place to use the restroom outside. And the sign from the street is seen. We've replaced that sign now. It's a bigger sign. But it's on a great location. People walk up and down the street all the time. And so it's a great opportunity to talk to people and evangelize. And they know right where we're at. I pass out tracts. Because can I speak Romanian? Puțin. I speak a little. And working on it, getting better. Google Translate has been a great help for that. But you meet people, talk to people, and pass out New Testaments. This is a street that's a few blocks away from the building. And I've been on this Krishan many times. And passing out, talking people with the Bible, and for a Bible study. About 80% of Romania is Orthodox, which is similar to Catholicism, and pretty well closed-minded many times. That's the normal track stand, and we stand out in front, and we talk to people as they go by. This is the group, the church there in Severine. I say that, I need to make a pause a little bit. This is Wednesday night. This gentleman here, Sorin, he's my translator, and his dad is here, and his wife is maybe in the back, or not there at this time, but that's his dad, Jan, and his mother, and that's his younger brother and his fiancée. And so Jan and Nutsa go to a village on Sunday, Padesh, and Popescu also goes to a village on Sunday. And Matika here, he also goes to a village on Sunday. So they have small little churches they're trying to help, and on Wednesday we come back together, and I normally teach on Wednesday, and Sam does some preaching on Sunday, and we work together. This young lady here was baptized a couple of years ago when Carrie Keenan came by, and she's been a great help. And I guess I knew part of this was going to be impromptu, and I'm just going to be impromptu right here. Adelina is a wonderful young girl. She just graduated. In fact, a day before we left, we went to her graduation to kind of encourage her. And she comes over on us on Sundays and eats with us and helps us with the Romanian and Tammy helps her with her English because she's pretty good with English. But she's only able to graduate from high schools because her dad made a decision to leave the country to go to France. Her mom and dad has been away from France since we've been there. They've come back, and I've only seen them a couple of times. He cannot afford to put her in high school. They live in a village where there is no high school, there is no bus system. And so Vasile had to make a decision. And I wish I could have talked to him a little bit longer. But you see, when they joined the EU, they opened the doors for all the countries that were part of the EU. They can freely go. So he goes to France. And the fellow that I met in Cork, Ireland, Mick, who knows a great deal about Europe generally, he knows of one congregation in France. And they happen to be about 4.5 hours from that congregation. They're in a group of about 250 families of Romanians when they go to France. But the work is better. And so he was able to put his daughter through high school, and she now wants to go to college. But it's a pull on the family. And if I say that is typical, it's not unusual at best. It's not unusual. It may be, in fact, be typical. There are many people that work a little bit, come back. It's very common in Romania, and it makes it difficult. But that's where her dad is, and I don't know about you, but I'm so thankful that my mom and dad didn't have to leave the country to send me to high school. And you don't know how thankful I am when, about the age of 18, when I heard the gospel for the first time, and I obeyed the gospel in 1981. All I had to do was to travel over about 10 miles where I could meet with a church, a small church, but a good church that I could grow and learn the Bible with there at Plano. But she didn't have that opportunity. So, if you ask me why I'm in Romania, and they do. They ask Sam that. Sam's gone to English class. Adelina has pulled him into English class, and he's got to speak a little bit of English in the high school, etc. And that's what they ask him. Why are you here? Because many people do want to leave Romania. And then he tells them he's here because of the gospel. And they don't quite understand that. I understand that. But he lets them know that's why he's here. Now, he's not thinking that. He's thinking, you should be asking me, why am I away from my fiancée who's in Mississippi? That's on his mind, but not now. He's married, and that's why we came back. This is my family in 1999 and 2001, and my youngest one there holding Abraham's hand is Samuel, and he's the one that just got married. And when he was young, he went to Romania. But ever since then, he's been wanting to go back to Romania. I don't know what put that in him, but he wanted to go back. And he actually, when he went down to help my mom and dad in a few years back, and Dad passed away, and then my mom wanted him there, and he wanted to go to college. My wife and I said, we'll go. You go to college, we'll come down. And he went and did really well. A lot better than his dad did at college. He got a 4.0 the last 2 years. But Dad, I want to go to Romania. All right, I'll go with you. And so with the help of Kerry Keenan, who wanted us to go, because his family's been asking for help, that's why we go. We're going to go try. So we working in Severine. Every 2 weeks we go to Craiova to try to get a church going there. And once in a while I'll leave Samuel by himself in Severine and travel over to Constanța to the church that's there. But in the center, there's nothing. There's about over 20 million people in Romania. And in the very center of Romania, there's no church. There's a fellow over in Moldova that I'm hoping to meet in August, Sergei. And the congregation there, they work with a lady. I should say young. She would like me to say young. I work with a lady, and she was converted, and she comes back to Romania where she lives, and they're asking help. Where's the nearest congregation? And she's up there right in the heart of this, and she's near Cluj. She's about an hour and a half from Cluj, and I can't tell them there's a congregation. So Sergei is Skyping. They're giving a lesson through Skype. And I volunteered to do that, but she only speaks Romanian, and my Romanian is little. So that's where she's at. So there's a huge need to go to Romania to spread the gospel. I want to start a church someplace up here near Cluj. Because as you look at this, the purple up there, that's the Orthodox. Up in the center area, and Cluj is a larger city in Romania. You have Roman Catholic and Reformed and others. Perhaps we're a little bit open there. But it's going to have to be by train, and I'm not sure if we're going to make that because we've been coming down here toward Craiova. But eventually I would like to try to get up there to the area where they may be a little more open with the gospel. Now, the difficulty I had was this. I want to be legal. I don't want to be illegal in Romania. I couldn't get a long-term visa. I got 3 months. And the association wasn't set up. And we're getting down to the very end. And I look on my phone, and a friend of mine, Glenn Warner from FC, and oh, there's Glenn. He's over in Cork, Ireland. I thought maybe we could go there. So I start talking to Glenn, and on day 89, we flew out of Romania, landed in London and came to Cork. And there were about 7 Christians in Cork. There's about 8 or 9 Christians up in Bangor, which is a different country. That's Northern Ireland. And worked with the church there in Cork for 3 months. Now, there in Cork, Mick, I call him Mick, it's Michael Connolly. He goes to the college twice a week. Sets up his stand, and I got to pass out free New Testaments and talk with the students. And we were right by the other groups there in front of the library. But we had one fellow who came the first day from that contact, and we worked with him for a little while. And now you see Mick here on the street, and it's a question and answer buzzer, and they want to answer the questions and give out New Testaments, something to spark them in an interest into the gospel. And it actually does fairly well. So that's what I did while I was in Cork, away from Romania. I was looking out at the campus at University Cork College. It's a gorgeous campus, and it's a very old campus, but students from everywhere. And I thoroughly enjoyed the work, actually, we got to do in Cork. This is the fellow named Tony. Now, Tony was in Cork, no, near Cork, not in Cork. He's near Cork. And Tony got fed up with the church that he was attending with this premillennial view. He was attending a Baptist church, Matthew 24, been going for a few years. It doesn't match what I'm reading. And he quits, walks away. But he doesn't quit fully. On his own time, he takes a stand out and puts it out there on the street and asking for prayers for the congregation that you're attending. We can pray for you. He volunteers to go to a radio station. Can I read the New Testament? Can I read the Bible online or on the air? And they sure, we got a spot for you. And so he's volunteering for that. That's been going on for about a year. Now, before I arrived, Glenn Warner, the week before I arrived, Glenn puts on Meetup, advertising where the church meets, etc. And Tony's wife, Colette, hands the phone over. You might be interested in this, Tony. Now, Tony sees the little advertisement on Meetup, and he attends. I'm thinking it was the second week we arrived in Cork. Now, we have a new contact with Tony and Colette. And for about a month and a half, we just studied. He studied with Glenn, he studied with Mick, he studied with Mick and I, and the questions. And I'd like to share one little discussion that may be helpful to you as you're working with others. Go with me to the John chapter 3 passage. If you've worked with those who believe in faith only, you know how they're going to react. Most of the time, they're in John chapter 3. And Tony was no different. But I do believe Tony had an open heart. And when he tried to say being born of water and being born of spirit, that the water really isn't baptism, I said, Tony, do me a favor here. Let's look at the context. Go back, if you will, to John chapter 4 and read with me verses 1 to 3. And as I read this passage, I'm going to ask you this question. Why did Jesus leave Judea? Verse 1. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. So why did he leave Judea? Because he was making and baptizing more disciples than John. And if we know anything about John's baptism, was it pretty successful? Doesn't Mark say all Jerusalem and Judea were baptized? And Jesus is doing what? He's making and baptizing more than John. Now let's go back to chapter 3 for a moment. In chapter 3, start at verse 25. Now, a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan to whom you bore witness, look, he's baptizing and all are going to him. What's happened to John's disciples? They are jealous that Jesus is outdoing John in doing what? Making and baptizing disciples. That's what he's been doing in Judea. And so when Jesus says, Nicodemus, you must be born again, or born from above, you must be born of the water and the Spirit, what would Nicodemus naturally think? And Tony looked at me and he said, yeah, it's a good point, Dan. And I could tell it helped him. Now, because he had an open heart, he had a bias, and we all have a certain bias. But because he was willing to look and to study, and I tell you what, that was so encouraging just to see it in Tony. And he couldn't get enough of it. He studied with Glenn, he studied with Mick, he studied with I. And finally, one Thursday night after midweek study, Glenn's dropping us off at the house. we get a call that he wanted to get baptized. And then about 2 minutes later, we got another call. His wife, Colette, had been studying along too, and she was baptized. And so we baptized him. Mick did in the ocean, which is kind of a neat thought. Now, by the way, let me go back here. Mick now, the preacher there, has been invited that on the hour after Tony reads in the Bible, the New Testament, Mick now can comment for an hour free, because the service that Tony has been doing on his own in reading the New Testament there in the city of Cork. Now, I will tell you, you think Ireland would be religious. I went to many bookstores when I was in town, and it is very difficult to find any. There's no bookstore that I could find, a Bible bookstore, and the Bibles are very few. So the New Testaments that we're getting out really do matter there in Ireland. My wife had a ladies' class while we were there, and they had a picture there. And this is Mick's wife. She's from Kazakhstan. And this is Colette, who was baptized with her husband and the 3 girls. And right now they're touring some of the churches that support them. And they got to go to Samuel's wedding. That was a real boost for all of us. Now, that's not the end of the story. About 2 months after Tony and Colette were baptized, they got 4 boys, just like we do. And Dylan's been studying. Now, he's been attending the Baptist church, but his dad's been talking to him too. He's been Skyping with Naomi online, and he's studying the Bible with her. What a great thing to do with someone you may want to spend the rest of your life with. And they were studying together. And Tony, like a dad, would say, you tell the true gospel. Tony, you tell the true gospel. And you know what Dylan did? He began to go through the Scriptures himself too. And after a few weeks, Mick now is called out, because Dylan and Naomi also were baptized into Christ. And it's one of those things, as you begin to reach the hearts of people with the gospel, it is one and the other, and you reach out with your family, to those you contact, the ones whom you know the most, with the gospel of Christ. And so they were baptized. I knew this is the first time I've done any kind of an overview of Romania, and I knew it wasn't going to be nearly enough time, and I'd apologize, but I want to say one thing about the church in Bangor, because I went up there. Mick drives 5 hours every month to go up there to Bangor. Now, there are 2 men, there's about 7 ladies up there, and they're jewels. They had us over every time we went up there. And of course, we get back around 3 o'clock in the morning, and poor Mick has to drive. But I'm going to tell you a story. In the late 60s, maybe early 70s, one preacher came from Dublin, went up there and talked to the congregation that was institutional, and they changed. They all changed. They saw it. Well, fast forward another 25 years or so, and one of the men inadvertently invited one of the young men from America to come preach for them from something like the Memphis School of Preaching. And the ladies found out about it. Now, one thing about this, for the ladies up there, if you don't have the Scripture with it, they're not going to believe you. And they weren't so happy about this, and they talked. And they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to allow him to come, and we'll give him 6 weeks to teach what he believes on institutionalism. And he did. And then the following Sunday, Mick got up and spoke one time, and the man got up and left. But I tell you, I appreciate so much their willingness. If it's in the Scripture, show us. They gave him an opportunity. They had a Berean spirit. And they test. Paul said, 1 Thessalonians 5, test everything, hold fast that which is good. And they did that. And he actually went down to Belfast, and he's preaching someplace else there in Ireland. But I tell you what, and Sewell Hall also loves that church up there in Bangor. They're quite a good group to be with. This is where I spend most of my time, is right here. Samuel likes to walk in Severine, pass out tracts. I want to be at the building so they may associate when they get the track, etc. They can come back here. So we kind of mix it up a little bit. And this is that family that's pulled us in. They help us sometimes fold the bulletins and teach Romanian on Sunday. And so this is really where I spend most of my time. That's a winter shot that Tammy got for me, talking to some people and passing out free New Testaments. In the last bit of time we have, I just want to say, we ran into a trouble with the one family that's been begging us to come. Their youngest son was living together with his girlfriend. When we went to Ireland, they all kind of changed apartments. And my son Samuel basically stepped up to the plate and began to talk to the young man, like Jesus said in Matthew 18, privately. And then he brought his mom and dad. And he fully acknowledged he was sinning with the girl, but wouldn't stop. Wasn't planning on stop. And so as a congregation, we took the very next step of Matthew 18, and we withdrew. If you turn just for a second to Matthew 18, let me just read a second here. I do want to fit this point in. In Matthew 18, verses 15 to verse 18, you see the protocol that Jesus has when a brother is in sin, of what to do and how to go about it. The attitude, and sometimes I call Matthew 18 the church sermon. This is Jesus' only church sermon. This is the only sermon that Jesus uses the word church in, and it is a sermon. You have Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 10 is a sermon. Matthew 13 is a sermon. Matthew 18 is a sermon. And Matthew 23, 24, 25 is a sermon. Look at your red letter editions. Matthew is very organized, highly detailed in his organization, and this is a church sermon. And you might even think, and I think this 15 to 20 is about the center of the sermon. It's based around this in the center. And the one thing Jesus wants His church, the one sermon He teaches on, is how to keep the church pure. That's what He wanted. That's His one church sermon. Now before you do that, you have to have the right attitude. So let me go back to verse 12. What do you think, Jesus says? If a man has 100 sheep, and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in, search for the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly, I say to you, he rejoices over it more than the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Jesus doesn't want anyone to perish. Well, what's the mechanism He has given the church to do that? If somebody sins, you go and talk to them in private. And sometimes on Facebook, you need to address that too. You don't have to tell the elders, you don't have to tell the preacher. You talk to that person. You do that directly. That's one of the biggest mistakes I've made as a young preacher. Jesus wants us to be involved to help keep His church pure. Now, the dad broke down, and he didn't understand why we would ask the church to withdraw from us. He understood the Scriptures, but emotionally he can't take that in. He just simply says he's weak. And let me go back to my beginning illustration about every day God gives you a sweet roll. Every day God gives you life. And what He's unwilling to do with His son, His youngest, God did. God separated Himself from His own Son. And it wasn't disfellowship. Jesus would have wanted just to be disfellowshipped, right? But when they pierced His hands and His feet, and He cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Will you realize He did that for you and for me? And if He put me first, and in some ways it looks like that God loved me more than His own Son, because Jesus took the price for me. Hasn't God made a big enough deposit in my life, in your life, that when I wake up in the morning, wake me up as a disciple. Open my ear. May I not be disobedient. May I not remove my back from those who give me a whip or spit in my face. Lord, I will take it because your Son took it for me. A deposit that will last me not a lifetime. A deposit that will last for eternity. I hope Jesus' death has not only forgiven you, but done this. And I'll close with this. Go with me to Acts chapter 3. Because God will bless us. God blesses the righteous and the unrighteous. But listen to the way He wants to bless you. This is what His choice to bless you. In Acts 3 verse 26, God, having raised His servant, sent him you first to bless you by turning every one of you from your wickedness. Has God blessed you? Has He helped turn you from wickedness? Now He'll bless you with day and great gifts, but I tell you the way God really wants to bless you, He wants to love you enough and show you a sacrifice He's given enough that each of us may turn from our wickedness. And with that, we are a blessed people. If you need to make yourself right with the Lord, if you've got some corrections to make, we encourage you to do so at this time while we stand, while we